It's strange how quiet life becomes after a storm. For the first few weeks, I could still hear the echoes of it in my mind. The sharp words, the slammed doors, the finality of the signature on the divorce papers. But now it's just silence. The silence is overwhelming. At first I thought I would welcome it, but it's as if the absence of sound only makes the void inside me more pronounced. I hadn't realized how much I had invested in my marriage until it was over. It wasn't just about the love we once shared or the house we built together. It was the life we were supposed to have. The future I thought was guaranteed to me. The plans we made with all the certainty in the world. That's what was gone now. The house, once a symbol of the life Audrey and I were supposed to have, feels empty. When I walk through the rooms now, it's just a series of memories, all of them haunting me. There are no more dinners around the table with the kids. No more laughter echoing through the halls. No more plans for holidays or future projects. It's all just still. I wake up every morning in this strange, new life where I am free, but the freedom feels like a prison. There's no one beside me when I wake up. I have no one to share my day with, no one to talk about the mundane things that used to matter. And it's worse on weekends. Those long, empty days that stretch out in front of me like endless roads with no destination. It's hard to admit, but I'm scared. I'm scared of how I'll fill this emptiness. I've spent so much time trying to fix what was broken, my marriage, my career, myself, that I didn't realize I'd lost something more fundamental. I've lost the belief that I can truly have something real again. I started throwing myself into work. At least at the construction site, there's a sense of purpose. There's something to be done, something tangible to show at the end of the day. I could control the walls I built, the floors I laid, but I couldn't control the fracture in my life that had left me alone in this house. I did everything I could to stay busy, fixing the house, taking care of the girls, and even diving into new projects that might distract me from the aching emptiness. But it never lasts. The silence always returns, louder than before, with every passing hour. And yet I felt like I had no right to complain. Audrey and I had agreed on the divorce. We were amicable. There were no fights, no dramatic moments. It was just two people who had grown apart, quietly, over time. It should have been a clean break, but nothing feels clean when you're standing in the ruins of what you thought was your life. One evening, after a long week of work, I sat on the porch, a beer in hand, staring out into the quiet night. The neighborhood had settled into its routine, but it felt like the world had forgotten to move forward with me. I glanced at the time, realizing I had no plans for the weekend. No date, no social events. Just me and this house. I tried to brush off the loneliness, but it clung to me like a weight. It wasn't just about not having anyone to spend time with. It was about the realization that my life as I knew it had slipped through my fingers. I had everything until I didn't. And now I was trying to fill the gap with everything I could, but nothing worked. I grabbed my phone, half expecting it to stay silent, but it buzzed. It was Mike, my brother-in-law, the one person who seemed to understand the space I was in. He had always been there when things were tough with Audrey, and now that things were over, I guess I still found myself leaning on him. "Plans for Saturday?" Mike's message read. I stared at it for a moment before typing back, "Nothing planned." "You should come out with me and Megan," he replied quickly. "It'll be fun, trust me." I hesitated. "Sure, what's the plan?" "A little fairground event, you'll enjoy it." I was too tired to argue, too worn down by the silence to decline. "All right, I'll join." As I put the phone down, I realized it was the first time in weeks I'd had something to look forward to, a small spark in the dark. I guess that's what you hold on to when everything else feels broken. Small moments, however fleeting. As I changed into something more presentable, I thought about how much I'd let my life fall into disarray, how much I had forgotten to care about myself. But maybe this was the start of something. Maybe this weekend, this small impromptu outing, could give me the reset I didn't know I needed. I wasn't ready for the whirlwind of emotions that was about to hit. I wasn't ready for the connections I would make, or the way this moment would shape the course of my life. But for the first time in months, I felt a small, quiet hope that I wasn't alone in this anymore. The day had been long, heavier than usual, and it felt like the weight of the world was pushing down on me. But as the clock ticked toward the evening, there was a flicker of something different, something that might pull me out of the slump I had fallen into since Audrey left. I glanced at the phone again, unsure if it was a distraction or a chance for something more. Mike had invited me to the fairground event. I had no real interest in fairs or crowds, but I needed to break the monotony. Maybe it would be a good idea. For once, I just needed to get out of the house, away from the reminders of what was missing. When Mike arrived, his easygoing grin told me I was in for something I couldn't quite predict. He didn't really give me a choice in the matter, nor did he need to. He knew I wasn't going to say no. The fair was buzzing with life, families laughing, children running around, and food stands offering too many choices. It felt like a dream. One of those weird, surreal moments where everything feels oddly out of place. I stood there half-dazed as Mike joked about how I could use a bit more fun in my life. But that's when I saw her. Layla Foster was standing by a game booth, her laughter light and carefree, like she had no idea how contagious it was. She was with a few friends, but the moment I saw her, something shifted. It wasn't just her smile or the way her eyes sparkled. It was something about the way she moved, the confidence in her steps that made her stand out from the crowd. I didn't even realize I was staring until Mike nudged me in the ribs, laughing. "See someone you like?" he teased, but the words fell flat in my ears. I hadn't been ready for this. Her gaze met mine, and for a brief, split second, I felt like I was the only one standing there. Her eyes locked with mine, and in that instant, it felt like the world around us disappeared. It wasn't dramatic or over the top. It was just a glance, but it hit me harder than I expected. "Gregor, right?" she asked, stepping toward me with a friendly grin, her voice light but steady. "Mike's been talking about you." I managed a small smile. "Yeah, that's me." We made small talk, the awkwardness hanging between us like an unspoken question. I felt the pull to run away, to retreat back to the familiar silence of my home, where I could at least pretend I had control. But there was something about her. Something warm and open, and strangely enough, it made me want to stay. The evening passed faster than I expected. Layla was easy to talk to, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. It wasn't the wild, carefree laughter of someone who had everything figured out. It was a gentle release of tension, a moment where I could forget the pain and just enjoy the moment. As we walked around the fair, talking about nothing and everything at once, I noticed how effortlessly she seemed to be at ease. She wasn't pretending to be happy, she just was. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I was actually looking forward to something outside of the endless cycle of work and solitude. "You're not from around here, are you?" I asked, curious. She had that vibe, one that told me she wasn't just another face in the crowd. "No, I'm from Portland," she said, her eyes lighting up as she spoke. "Moved here for work a couple of years ago. It's been a good change. I didn't expect to like it, but here we are." I laughed, not entirely sure why, but it felt like we were peeling away layers with each word. "I get that. It's funny how life turns out." We walked a bit more, each of us lost in our thoughts, but still tethered to the moment by our conversation. I realized that for the first time since Audrey and I had split, I didn't feel quite so alone. There was something about Layla that made me feel like I wasn't invisible. When the evening wound down and we stood in the parking lot, the air cool against my skin, I felt a hesitation I couldn't explain. Part of me wanted to ask if I could see her again, but the other part was afraid of what might happen if I allowed myself to feel something for someone new. "I had a good time tonight," she said, her smile genuine, her voice soft. "Thanks for coming out." "Yeah, me too," I replied. I paused for a moment, then added, "Maybe we could grab a coffee sometime." She raised an eyebrow, her grin widening. "I thought you didn't do crowds," she teased. I chuckled, shaking my head. "I don't, usually. But for you, maybe I could make an exception." She smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could see a future that wasn't so bleak. "All right," she said, "let's make it happen. You know where to find me." As I watched her walk away, I felt a strange weight lifting off my chest. The emptiness didn't feel so suffocating anymore. It was a small spark, but maybe it was all I needed to start something new, something I hadn't even known I was looking for. The week after the fair had been an odd mixture of hope and uncertainty. It wasn't that I had suddenly found the answer to all my questions, but there was something different about the way I was seeing the world now. I hadn't felt this alive in a long time. Layla's presence, though brief, had sparked something in me that I had long buried. Hope. I wasn't naive enough to think everything would be easy. The scars of my past still tugged at the edges of my mind. The memories of Audrey, of the love we once shared and the pain of its unraveling, were never far away. But for the first time since my divorce, I was waking up without that crushing weight in my chest. It wasn't gone, but it was lighter. I had messaged Layla after our night at the fair. I didn't want to seem desperate or like I was moving too fast, but I needed something to hold on to. "Coffee sometime?" I had typed, and within a few minutes she had replied with a simple, "How about Saturday?" The days leading up to our meeting felt like an eternity, but when Saturday finally came, I felt an unfamiliar excitement. I got dressed with more care than usual, checked myself in the mirror twice, and even gave my hair a quick fix. I wasn't trying to impress her, at least not intentionally, but I couldn't deny that something about this felt different. She felt different. I arrived early at the cafe wanting to make sure I wasn't late. The place was quiet, cozy, with soft lighting and the hum of background conversation. It wasn't the type of spot I usually frequented, but it seemed like the perfect place for what I hoped would be the start of something. When Layla walked in, I stood up immediately. She looked casual, effortlessly stylish in a denim jacket and jeans, her long hair framing her face in a way that made her look both confident and approachable. There was a warmth about her, something that made me feel like I had known her for much longer than just a few days. "You're early," she said, smiling. Her voice had that same calming effect it had the other night. "Just wanted to make sure I didn't miss the chance to have coffee with the most interesting person I've met in a while," I said, my words coming out a bit more smoothly than I expected. She laughed, and it was that genuine laugh that made everything around us feel just a bit brighter. We sat down, and the conversation began to flow almost effortlessly. It wasn't about the small talk, the weather, the usual pleasantries. It was about the real stuff. "I've been living in Portland for a couple of years now," she told me, sipping her coffee. "It's strange, really. I thought I was moving here for a job, but I think I was running away from something." I paused, my heart beating a little faster. It was a feeling I knew too well. "I get that," I said softly. "I think we all run from something sometimes. I left a lot behind when I got divorced. Not just the marriage, but everything that came with it, the life I thought I was going to have." Layla's eyes softened. She didn't ask for details, but I could see that she understood. It was in the way she held my gaze, like she was listening to the parts of me I hadn't spoken aloud in a long time. We talked about our pasts, our lives, but it wasn't heavy. It felt like we were both being vulnerable, yet safe in each other's presence. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel like I had to hold my breath, afraid of the next wave of pain crashing over me. At one point she asked, "What about you, Gregor? What do you really want?" I smiled, a little surprised by the question. It felt like she was asking more than just a surface-level inquiry. She was asking me to dig deeper, to think about what truly mattered to me now. "I want peace," I said, surprised at how easily the words came out. "I want to feel like I can breathe again. It's been a long time since I've felt content. I've spent too much time fighting my past, but now I think I just want to let it be." Layla nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good start," she said. "Letting go of what's been holding you back can be the hardest part." I felt a shift in the air between us, something that wasn't there before. It wasn't romantic, at least not entirely, but it was the kind of connection that felt rare and real. She wasn't offering empty promises or pretending to be someone she wasn't. She was simply present. As the conversation continued, I found myself leaning in, sharing more than I had in months. I told her about my kids, how they were the one constant in my life now. Ella, the older one, always asking why her mom wasn't around as much. Zoe, who was still too young to understand the intricacies of relationships, but could sense when something wasn't right. I didn't tell her everything, of course. There were parts of me that still felt too raw to share, too fragile to expose. But in that moment, it didn't feel like there was any rush. We were both just two people, trying to figure things out. By the time the coffee cups were empty, the sun was beginning to set outside, casting a warm glow across the cafe. We stood to leave, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of my past hanging over me. There was no expectation, no pressure, just a quiet understanding. "I'm glad we did this," she said as we walked outside. "Me too," I replied. I felt something stirring inside me, a quiet anticipation that hadn't been there in a long time. We said our goodbyes, and as I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but think that this might be the beginning of something. Maybe it wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was about embracing the possibility of a future that was still unwritten. The weeks following that coffee date with Layla passed by in a strange blur. On one hand, I was getting more comfortable with the idea of moving on, of rebuilding my life one small piece at a time. On the other, the underlying feelings of doubt and fear were still lingering, like shadows just out of sight. I could tell I was slowly starting to enjoy life again. I hadn't realized how much I had suppressed the need for human connection, how much I had distanced myself from everyone out of fear that I might get hurt again. Layla was different. She wasn't trying to fix me or make me forget my past. She simply existed beside me, offering a quiet understanding without the pressure. But as much as I wanted to feel secure in this new connection, something subtle began to shift in the way I saw Layla. It wasn't her fault, it was mine. I was the one carrying the baggage from my past. I started overthinking the smallest things. Her text messages, her tone, the way she spoke about her past. I caught myself trying to decipher every word, every pause, trying to make sense of things that hadn't even happened yet. There were moments when I felt like we were two people in the same room, but not really connecting. I started questioning everything. Was I just too scared to trust again? Or was something off? Layla's behavior began to change too, but it was subtle. It wasn't that she was pulling away. It was more like she was becoming more distant without realizing it. I noticed it first when we tried to make plans for the weekend. I had suggested we grab dinner, and she had agreed. But there was this strange hesitancy in her response that I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Sounds good, but I've got a couple of things to sort out first. Let's touch base later in the week," she had said, her words kind but slightly distracted. I told myself it was nothing. People got busy. But then I began noticing more small things, the way she sometimes canceled plans last minute, or how she would take longer to reply to texts, almost as if I wasn't her priority anymore. It wasn't that I wanted to accuse her of anything. She had her own life, her own responsibilities. But the longer it went on, the more I started to feel that familiar ache in my chest, the feeling of being replaced, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to lose interest in me. I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind, but the insecurity started creeping in, like a weed growing where there should have been peace. I had learned the hard way what it felt like to be left behind, and I feared that history was repeating itself. But this time it was different. This wasn't my marriage unraveling. This wasn't a betrayal that I could point to. It was just uncertainty. It was the feeling of walking through a fog, unsure of what might be ahead. One afternoon, after a particularly quiet week, I found myself staring at my phone, debating whether or not to text Layla. Part of me was hesitant, unsure if I was being too clingy or worse, if I was overthinking everything. The other part, the more vulnerable part, wanted to reach out and get some kind of confirmation that I wasn't imagining things, that this wasn't all slipping away. Finally, I sent a simple text. "Hey, I've been thinking about you. Hope everything's going well." I hit send and immediately regretted it. I watched the dots appear, then disappear, then appear again, and I felt my anxiety rise with each passing second. It felt like an eternity before she replied. "Hey, sorry, I've been caught up with work and some personal stuff. Can we talk tomorrow?" I read the message, my chest tight, a knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't the response I had hoped for, but it wasn't bad either. Still, the delay in her reply, the way she mentioned personal stuff, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. It was so easy to let my mind wander into dark places, to imagine that there was someone else, someone who had captured her attention and was now claiming the space that I had once occupied. I reminded myself that I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep analyzing every word, every action, trying to make something out of nothing. But it was hard. So hard. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and tried to push the thoughts out of my head. Layla had been nothing but kind, understanding, and supportive since we had met. She had never given me a reason to doubt her. Yet here I was, questioning everything, wrestling with my own fears and insecurities. Was it possible that I was sabotaging something that had potential simply because of the past? I knew I had to confront the reality of the situation. I needed to stop letting my past control my present. But the truth was, the scars from my marriage, those emotional bruises, were still raw. They were always there, just beneath the surface, and sometimes they flared up in ways I couldn't control. I decided to give Layla space, to trust that she would reach out when she was ready. But I also knew that I needed to do some soul-searching of my own. I couldn't let my insecurities rule my life, not anymore. The next time we spoke, I promised myself that I would be open and honest, both with her and with myself. No more holding back, no more second-guessing. I couldn't live in the past any longer. The signs were subtle at first, as they often are. It wasn't like a sudden shift that hit me all at once. No, it crept up slowly, silently, until I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about Layla and us. For the first time since my divorce, I started feeling something familiar, unease. It wasn't the raw, gut-wrenching pain I had felt with Audrey, but something else, a quiet, gnawing suspicion. It was like an itch at the back of my mind that I couldn't quite scratch. It began with the smallest of things, messages left unanswered for hours, her tone becoming a little more distant, her responses more clipped. Nothing overt, but enough to make my mind wander. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had no reason to suspect anything. Layla had been nothing but kind, and our time together had always felt easy. But there was a change in the air, something I couldn't ignore, something that felt like the quiet before a storm. One evening, I called her after work. I was sitting in my car, the hum of the engine as my only companion, and the exhaustion from the day weighing heavily on me. I needed to hear her voice to reconnect. I thought we'd planned to meet later, but when she answered, there was an immediate distance in her voice. "Hey, I'm just in the middle of something," she said, her words coming out a little too quickly, like she was trying to brush me off. "I'll call you back when I'm free." I paused. "Something important?" "No, just stuff. I'll catch up with you later." And that was it. There was no warmth in her voice, no invitation to make plans, no hint of excitement that we'd be seeing each other soon. It was all business, all the usual pleasantries without the heart. I waited for her call back. It never came. The minutes ticked by, then hours, and as the night wore on, I could feel the tension in my chest grow. The longer she stayed away, the more I found myself drifting into dark thoughts, thoughts I had buried after my marriage ended, thoughts I had promised myself I would never entertain again. What if she was seeing someone else? What if, like Audrey, she was growing distant, falling for someone who wasn't me? The thought made my stomach churn, and yet I couldn't shake it. The next day, I found myself scrolling through my phone, looking at the last few texts she had sent. They were fine, polite, even warm, but there was a certain coolness that had started to seep into her words. There were no long conversations about our day, no deeper thoughts shared like before. She was holding back, and I felt it. It wasn't just her behavior that started to shift, it was mine too. I found myself watching her more closely. When she was around, I couldn't stop myself from looking for any clues, any signs that would explain the distance. A part of me hated that I was turning into someone I didn't recognize, the kind of person who second-guessed every word and every action. And then came the phone call that would be the first real confirmation of my worst fears. I was at work when she called me, her voice more urgent than usual. I could hear the tension in it, a tightness I hadn't noticed before. "Gregor, I need to talk to you," she said, her tone measured. It was an odd way to start a conversation, and my stomach dropped. Something came up, and I think it's time we discussed it. I leaned back in my chair, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure how to say this," she continued, pausing as if looking for the right words. "But I've been thinking a lot about us, about where we're headed, and I just feel like I need to be honest with you. There's someone else." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind spun. I had heard it before. I had seen it before. But this wasn't Audrey, and I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to feel that same crippling betrayal again, not so soon, not after everything I had gone through. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Someone else?" I echoed, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "I didn't mean for it to happen, it just did," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm sorry, Gregor. I never wanted to hurt you." The words felt surreal. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to make her feel the hurt I was experiencing. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something inside me told me that the time for confrontation hadn't come yet. Not until I knew the full story. I sat there listening to her explain, but my mind was miles away, already processing the hurt, the disappointment, the overwhelming feeling of betrayal. I thought I had learned to protect myself, to guard my heart, but it was clear I had failed. Again. After the call ended, I felt hollow. It was as if all the warmth I had felt with Layla had evaporated into thin air, leaving nothing but the cold, hard truth of what had just happened. The small signs I had been ignoring, the distance, the hesitation, the sudden detachment, all made sense now. But understanding it didn't make it hurt any less. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on me. For the first time in a long while, I couldn't find the strength to move forward. I had been here before, and I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. The air in my apartment felt heavier than usual, pressing down on me with every passing moment. I hadn't heard from Layla since our last conversation. She had told me everything, yet nothing made sense. A part of me still clung to the hope that this was just a misunderstanding. That maybe, just maybe, I was overreacting. But there was a persistent voice in the back of my mind telling me I wasn't. I had to know the truth. If I was going to confront Layla again, I needed to be sure of what I was dealing with. I couldn't afford to make another mistake. I'd already lost so much, and the thought of losing myself again, in someone I thought I could trust, was too much. The next few days passed in a blur, but it wasn't the same kind of numbing silence as before. It was different now. It was suffocating, filled with questions I couldn't answer. I started noticing things that should have stood out earlier, subtle inconsistencies in her stories, moments when she seemed distracted or when she mentioned being busy without explanation. But I couldn't confront her on just feelings. I needed proof. I hated myself for even thinking this way, but the more I dwelled on it, the clearer it became. I had to gather the evidence. It wasn't about punishment. It was about protecting myself, about making sure I wasn't being led down a path that would end in more heartache. I started small. I went through the messages again, the ones she had sent, the ones I'd sent. I wasn't trying to invade her privacy. I was just trying to understand what had happened, where things had gone wrong. But the longer I read, the more I felt like a stranger in my own life. The messages were short, polite, and distant. There were no long conversations, no moments of intimacy that we had shared before. Each word felt like it had been carefully chosen, as though she was holding herself back from me. I could feel the weight of it all as I sat there, reading through them again, this time with the eyes of someone who was already broken. There was nothing definitive in these texts, nothing that screamed infidelity. But there was a coldness, a disconnection that hadn't been there before. But I needed more. I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was going on. I took a step I never thought I would take. I decided to check her social media. I knew it was a violation of her trust, but what was I supposed to do? I had already crossed the line once by doubting her, by letting my fears control my actions. Now I was trying to find the pieces of the puzzle, to understand what was real. Her Instagram was a curated collection of carefully chosen moments, There were no signs of anything out of the ordinary until I saw a picture of her with a man I didn't recognize. They were standing close together, her hand on his arm, a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. I felt a sharp sting in my chest. It wasn't just the closeness, it was the familiarity, the way she looked at him. It was something I had seen before, with Audrey. The same subtle intimacy that comes with shared moments, the kind of connection that goes beyond friendship. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself that it meant nothing. Maybe it was just a harmless picture. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty and self-loathing. I was angry at myself for even going down this road. I had told myself I would never be that person, the one who snoops, the one who invades someone else's privacy. But how else could I understand what was happening? How else could I protect myself from the inevitable heartbreak? Then came the moment that broke me. I was sitting in my living room one night when I received a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to open it. The message was simple. Layla is seeing someone else. You deserve to know the truth. There it was, the final confirmation I had been dreading. The message didn't contain any details, just a confirmation of everything I had feared. The betrayal wasn't just an idea anymore. It was real. And in that moment, I knew everything had changed. There was no turning back, no more pretending that everything would be okay. The truth was in my hands now, and I was left to figure out how to handle it. The anger came next, slow and burning. I had never felt so foolish in my life. How had I let myself believe that she was different? How had I let myself invest so much into someone who could so easily deceive me? But then, just as quickly as the anger came, a wave of sadness crashed over me. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about loss. It was about the realization that I had given my heart away again, only to have it trampled on. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the darkened streets below. The city felt as empty as I felt inside. I had no answers, no way of fixing this. I had spent so long convincing myself that I could trust again, that I could find someone to share my life with. But now, I didn't know who I was anymore. I had been here before, but this time it felt different. The pieces of my life, the things I thought were solid, were crumbling beneath me, and I didn't know how to stop it. The day had arrived. The truth hung over me like a thick fog, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the weight of it was suffocating. The message I had received, the confirmation that I hadn't imagined, the distance, the silence, the coldness, was real. Layla had been seeing someone else. I had known deep down, but seeing the words laid out in front of me shattered everything. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The facade I had built, the hope I had clung to, was crumbling. I had to confront her. There was no other choice. But I had no idea how I would handle it when the moment came. What do you say to someone you trusted, someone you thought you could build a future with, when they betray you in the most intimate way? I couldn't sit around waiting any longer. The uncertainty had eaten me alive. I called her. "Layla," I said, my voice tight with the mix of emotions I was struggling to contain. "We need to talk." There was a long pause on the other end, a hesitation that seemed to last forever, and when she finally spoke, it wasn't what I expected. "I know," she said, her voice small, almost resigned. "I've been waiting for you to ask." I could feel my pulse quicken. "Is it true?" I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "Have you been seeing someone else?" There was another long pause, but this time it felt like she was bracing herself. "Yes," she whispered. I heard the words, but it felt like my brain couldn't process them. Everything around me blurred, the room, the air, the space between us. It all disappeared. I felt a sickening emptiness settle in the pit of my stomach. "Why?" I asked, the question so simple but so full of everything I didn't understand. "Why would you do this, after everything we've been through?" I could hear her breath hitch. "I never meant for it to happen. It's complicated, Gregor. I never wanted to hurt you, but I didn't know how to tell you." Complicated. The word echoed in my mind. It wasn't complicated. It was simple. She made a choice. a choice that left me alone with nothing but a painful truth. "I don't understand," I said, the frustration rising inside me. "You didn't think I'd notice? You didn't think I'd eventually see the way you were pulling away? You think I'm blind? This isn't complicated, Layla. This is betrayal." I could feel the anger building inside me, but I was fighting to keep it in check. I needed answers, not a confrontation. I needed to understand why I was being thrown aside like this, after everything we had shared. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said again, her voice trembling. "But I didn't know how to stop it. I couldn't keep pretending that things were fine when they weren't." "Things weren't fine," I muttered under my breath, my chest tight. "You should have told me sooner. I would have respected that, but you didn't give me a chance to decide. You just walked away without saying anything." I could hear the guilt in her voice now. She was unraveling, the walls she had built around herself crumbling under the weight of her actions. "I didn't know how to fix it, Gregor. I didn't know how to make it right. I thought maybe if I just stayed, if I just kept going, it would get better. But it didn't. I didn't know what to say. How could I respond to that? How could I find the words to tell her that she had shattered everything I had believed in? That I wasn't some rebound or someone to be used to fill a void. That I was a person who trusted her with all my heart, and she had destroyed that trust. "You didn't think about me," I said softly, the pain evident in my voice. "You didn't think about what this would do to me, to us. You didn't even consider that maybe I needed you too. You didn't think that maybe, just maybe, I was giving you everything I had left." There was silence on the other end of the line. She didn't have an answer, and for the first time in this conversation, I felt a strange sense of clarity. There were no more lies to uncover, no more stories to untangle. The truth was laid bare, and I had to face it. I think it's over, Layla," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The finality of the words hit me like a punch to the gut. But it was true. It had to be true. This wasn't something that could be fixed with apologies or empty promises. "Gregor, she started, but I cut her off. "No, Layla, you've already said enough. You've already hurt me enough. It's over. We're done." I ended the call before she could say anything more. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that filled the spaces where words once lived, and now all I had was a broken version of myself to pick up. I leaned back against the wall, feeling the weight of everything I had just heard settle into my bones. The anger, the hurt, the disappointment, all of it crashed over me in waves. But there was something else too. Something deeper. I felt relief. It wasn't the relief of someone who had found peace. It was the relief of someone who had finally faced the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I wasn't sure what came next. I wasn't sure where I went from here. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay in the past any longer. I couldn't keep holding on to something that was already gone. It was time to move on. The silence that followed our last conversation felt heavier than anything I had ever known. I had ended things with Layla, but the pain hadn't stopped. It was only just beginning. The truth was out now, but that didn't make it easier to swallow. I had expected a rush of clarity, of relief, but instead I was left with an overwhelming emptiness, a sense of futility that I couldn't escape. For days I kept replaying the conversation in my mind. Her words echoed in my head. I never meant for it to happen. I kept hearing the guilt in her voice, but it didn't change anything. She had made a choice that took away the one thing I had trusted, and now I was left with a decision I didn't think I'd ever have to make again. I had fought so hard to rebuild my life after my divorce with Audrey. I had tried to move forward, to believe that there was something better waiting for me. And for a while, it had felt real. Layla had felt real. But now, I was questioning everything. What was the point of even trying if it was always going to end like this? I didn't want to make another mistake, but I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The signs were all there, and the reality was impossible to deny. She had betrayed me. She had broken my trust, just like Audrey had, and I couldn't keep putting myself through this cycle of pain. I didn't sleep much that week. My thoughts were scattered, my emotions erratic. I felt like I was floating through each day, unable to ground myself in any sense of stability. The familiar heaviness returned, the sense that my life was out of my hands. But this time, it wasn't just the shock of betrayal. It was the realization that I was no longer willing to accept this. I couldn't keep hoping for something to change. I knew what I had to do. I had to let her go. But that knowledge didn't make it easier. I sat in my office, my hands resting on the desk, staring at nothing in particular. I had already started looking into lawyers, figuring out how to make this official, but the thought of actually going through with it filled me with dread. What would it mean for me, for my kids? What would it mean for my heart, which had already been so thoroughly bruised? The decision felt impossible, and yet it was the only one I could make. I couldn't keep pretending that this wasn't happening. I couldn't keep investing in something that was already broken. I had learned the hard way that some things weren't meant to be fixed. I reached for my phone, typing out a text to Layla. It felt like the right thing to do, to finally say what I had been avoiding all week. "I think we need to talk," I wrote. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I don't think I can do this anymore. It's over." I stared at the screen for a moment before pressing send. I wasn't sure if it would be a relief or if it would tear me apart even more, but I knew it was the only option left. I couldn't keep living in the limbo of uncertainty. I couldn't keep wondering if she still cared. I needed to know, to have a clear end to this chapter. It felt like the final blow, but it also felt necessary. I had to take control of my life again, and that meant making the hardest decision I'd faced in years. I had already given her my trust, my heart, my future, and she had thrown it all away. But now, I was taking it back. I wasn't going to lose myself in the pain of it all. The minutes passed and my phone buzzed with her reply. I didn't look at it right away. Part of me was afraid of what she might say, but a larger part of me was done. Done with the uncertainty, done with the betrayal. I finally picked up the phone. "I understand," she replied. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." But those words didn't matter anymore. They couldn't undo what had already been done. They couldn't fix what was broken. I had spent too much time fixing things that weren't meant to be fixed. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. It was a cold evening, the kind of evening that made you reflect on everything you'd lost and everything you still had left. The decision was made and there was no going back. But as the evening wore on, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. It wasn't peace, but it was something. It was the end of a chapter, the final closure I had been looking for. And while I didn't know what the future would hold, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let my past dictate my life anymore. I took a deep breath, standing up to make the call to the lawyer. It was time to make it official. It's strange. The silence that follows when you finally make a decision that changes everything. The noise of the fight, the heartache, the endless thoughts, all of it fades away, leaving behind this stillness that feels both unsettling and freeing at the same time. The divorce was final. It had been a long time coming, but it still stung in ways I couldn't quite prepare for. There was a part of me that had hoped for a different outcome, that somehow Layla would come to her senses and I wouldn't have to take that step. But life doesn't always play out the way we want it to. Sometimes you have to face the ugly truths head on and let go of what isn't meant for you. And so, here I was, sitting in the aftermath, trying to make sense of a life I never thought I'd have to rebuild. The house felt bigger now. It was too quiet, but not in the comforting way I had hoped. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was lonely. I spent my days going through the motions, keeping myself busy with work and trying to fill the empty spaces with projects I'd once put off. My house, once a symbol of the life I had built with Layla, now stood as a reminder of everything I had lost. The kids were at their mom's for the weekend, and I found myself wandering from room to room, picking up things that didn't need to be picked up. I fixed broken fixtures, repainted walls, but none of it really filled the emptiness. The work gave me something to focus on, but it didn't heal the part of me that had been shattered. I thought about the moments when I had first met Layla, how easy it had been to laugh together, how the conversations flowed without effort. I thought about all the things we'd dreamed of, getting away on weekends, building a future, making a home together, and yet Here I was, standing alone in that home. It felt like the end of everything. But despite the weight of it all, I knew I had to move forward. I had to find a way to make peace with the end of this chapter in my life. I couldn't keep replaying the past in my head, wondering what went wrong or what I could have done differently. The truth was that no amount of questioning would bring me the answers I needed. I had to stop looking backward and start looking ahead. It wasn't easy. I felt lost sometimes, like I was drifting in a sea of uncertainty. But I had to remind myself that life doesn't stop. It keeps going, whether you're ready for it or not. I decided to make a change, to take control of what I could. I started running again, not just for fitness, but for clarity. The rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement helped clear my head, gave me a space to think. I used to run to escape, but now I was running to find myself again. One evening after a long run, I stood in the kitchen, sweaty and exhausted, with a glass of water in my hand. It was then that I realized something. There had been a part of me that had been numb for so long. I had been too afraid to feel, to confront the emotions I had buried under the weight of everything I had been through. But now I was starting to feel again. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty, but it was real. I couldn't deny that the pain of the divorce was still there, deep in my chest, but there was also something else growing, a sense of hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that comes with fairy tales or perfect endings. It was the kind of hope that grows from surviving, from weathering a storm and learning to rebuild with the pieces you have left. And that's what I was doing. I was rebuilding. It was slow, sometimes painful, but I was learning to trust myself again. I was learning to stand on my own, to find strength in the things that had once broken me. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more days where the loneliness would creep in, more moments when the weight of everything would threaten to crush me. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely lost. I didn't feel completely broken. I was starting to find my way back to myself. And for the first time since everything had started to fall apart, I allowed myself to believe that I could be happy again. Not because of someone else, but because of who I was becoming. The kids were coming back tomorrow. I hadn't seen them in days, and I couldn't wait to hold them, to tell them I loved them. They were the one thing that had always kept me grounded. They were the reason I had to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it seemed. As I sat down to dinner that evening, the silence felt a little less overwhelming. It wasn't the loud, comforting laughter I had imagined, but it was enough. I was enough. It was a start, and that for now was all I needed. It had been months since I'd seen Marcus. In a way, I thought that chapter of my life was behind me. After the divorce, after everything that had happened with Layla, I thought I was done with the ghosts of the past. But life, it seemed, had other plans. It started with an unexpected message, one that felt like a punch to the stomach. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through work emails when my phone buzzed with a new notification. Marcus. The name alone sent a jolt of unease through me. I hadn't heard from him in ages. Not since everything had gone down with Layla, when he had been part of the reason behind all of it. The complications, the lies, the confusion. I stared at the screen, hesitant, my heart pounding a little faster. What could he possibly want now? The message was short, direct, and to the point. "We need to talk. Can we meet up?" It took me a minute to process it. He didn't even say why. No explanation, no apology, just an urgent request to see me. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he reaching out because he had regrets? Was he trying to fix something that had long been broken? Or was this something else? Something I didn't want to even think about? I took a deep breath. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. The last time I saw him, it was at that club, when I had seen the way he had looked at Layla, the way they had interacted. I had felt it in my gut. Something wasn't right. And now, here he was again, forcing me to confront all the anger and confusion I had buried since then. I tried to push the thoughts aside. I told myself to be rational. Maybe he just wanted closure. Maybe he wanted to clear the air. But deep down, I knew this wouldn't be a simple conversation. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop, a neutral place, something I could walk away from if things got too heated. As I arrived and sat down at the table, I saw him walk through the door. He looked the same. Maybe a little more polished, a little more put together. But there was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place, a look that seemed to say he was carrying something heavy, something unresolved. When he sat down, the silence between us was thick. Neither of us spoke right away. I could feel the tension building, the weight of everything that had happened, everything that had been left unsaid. Finally, he spoke. "I know you probably don't want to see me," Marcus said, his voice surprisingly soft. "But I need you to hear me out." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say. What could I say? This was the man who had been part of the reason everything had fallen apart. The man who had been too close to Layla for comfort. I was angry. I was hurt. But I was also curious. I wanted to know why he had come back. Why now? "You've got 5 minutes," I said, my voice steady, but I could feel the sting of old wounds rising in my chest. He nodded, taking a breath before speaking again. "I've been thinking about what happened for a long time, and I know I messed up. I wasn't thinking about you, about her, about anyone but myself, and I hate that I did that to you." I wanted to roll my eyes. The apology felt too late, too rehearsed. He had done nothing to show any remorse before, so why now? Why this sudden change of heart? "I don't want your apology," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "I don't need it." He looked taken aback, but his expression softened. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Hell, I wouldn't forgive me either. But I needed to tell you that I regret everything. I know I was part of what ruined your relationship with Layla." I felt a knot form in my throat. Everything inside me screamed to walk away, to tell him to get lost and leave me to rebuild my life in peace. But there was something in his eyes, something raw, vulnerable, that made me hesitate. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "After everything, why come back to me?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting toward the window as if searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke again, his voice lower this time, almost like he was confessing to himself. "I've been a mess since then," he said. "I tried to convince myself that I was just a bystander in all of this, but I wasn't. I was selfish, and I need to make things right, not for you, not for her, but for me. I owe myself that much." I stared at him, unsure how to process what he was saying. Part of me wanted to believe him, to think that he was sincere, but the other part, the one that had been burned before, the part of me that had been left in the dust, wasn't ready to let my guard down. "I don't know what you want from me, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I've moved on. I've had to. I'm not the same person I was when all of this started. I'm not going to let you drag me back into that mess." His face fell, and for a brief moment I saw something I hadn't expected, a flicker of regret, of understanding. "I don't want to drag you anywhere," he said softly. "I just wanted to tell you the truth. For once I wanted to be honest with you. You deserve that much." I nodded slowly, the words hanging in the air between us. The truth was, I didn't know if I could forgive him. I didn't know if I wanted to, but I did know one thing. He had taken a step toward redemption, even if it was too late for me to be part of that journey. I stood up to leave, the weight of the conversation still sitting heavy in my chest. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Marcus," I said quietly. "But it's not here." I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the past behind. One step closer to the future I was learning to build on my own. It had been weeks since my conversation with Marcus, and yet his presence still lingered in my thoughts, uninvited and unwelcome. That conversation, with all its weight and revelations, had shaken me in ways I hadn't anticipated. But what hit hardest wasn't the words he said. It was the reminder of the lack of trust that had once been shattered and now stood before me, a barrier I wasn't sure how to cross. But now it wasn't Marcus or Layla or anyone else that mattered. It was me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I knew I had to turn inward and rebuild, piece by piece, the person I had been before all the heartbreak. The first step, I realized, was giving myself permission to feel. I had spent so much of my life bottling up emotions, pretending they didn't matter or that I didn't need anyone, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, to be human. So I gave myself space space to mourn the loss of Layla, to acknowledge the grief that had followed me through the days since the divorce. I gave myself permission to be angry, to feel betrayed, but I also gave myself permission to move past it, to not let the past define who I was or who I could become. I started small. It wasn't about grand gestures or making big decisions. It was about the little things that made me feel like I was regaining some control. I worked on my house, not because it needed repairs, but because it was something I could do, something that gave me a sense of accomplishment. I spent more time with the kids, not because I had to, but because they reminded me of the person I had been before all the mess, the person I wanted to be again. The mornings were still difficult. Waking up alone was always a reminder of the emptiness I was trying to fill, but I didn't let it paralyze me. I started running again, not just for fitness, but for clarity. It became my ritual, my way of clearing my mind, of letting go of the thoughts that had kept me chained to the past. Running was my escape, but it also became my confrontation with myself, with my insecurities, with the doubts that had taken root inside me. One morning after a long run, I was sitting on the front steps, catching my breath, when I noticed something I had stopped seeing for a long time. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting light on the yard. The air was crisp, the world was quiet, and for the first time in a long while I felt a glimmer of peace. It was a small thing, but it was enough. I stood up and walked inside. I didn't have the answers to all of my questions, and I didn't know what my future held. But I knew one thing: I couldn't keep hiding. I couldn't keep running from the person I had become. I had to rebuild, yes, but it wasn't about fixing the broken parts. It was about accepting them and learning to move forward with them. I thought about the way I had viewed relationships in the past, how I had believed that love was the answer to everything, how I had placed all my hopes and dreams into someone else's hands, waiting for them to fill the gaps in me. But the truth was, I had to fill those gaps myself. I couldn't rely on anyone else to make me whole. It was time to rebuild my confidence, not in the sense of proving to others that I was fine, but in proving to myself that I was capable of standing on my own, that I was enough. I picked up the phone that afternoon, feeling the weight of the decision settle into my chest. It had been a long time since I'd spoken to Layla, since I'd made the choice to cut ties and move on, but I needed closure. Not for her, for me. "Layla," I said when she picked up, my voice steady but soft. "We need to talk." She agreed to meet. When we sat across from each other at a small cafe, the awkwardness was palpable. There was so much unsaid between us, so much tension from everything that had happened. But this wasn't about getting back together. It wasn't even about forgiving her. This was about me finding my own peace. "I've had time to think," I said quietly, my eyes meeting hers. "I don't need you to apologize anymore. I don't need to hold on to the past, but I needed you to hear this. I'm moving on. I'm building my life again." She nodded slowly, the weight of her own regrets clear in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, Gregor, but I understand." The words hung in the air, but they no longer had the power to sting. They didn't need to. "I know," I said. "And I think we both need to move forward. Not together, but apart. I found my own path, and it's time for us to walk our own ways." It was a small moment, but in it I found something I hadn't realized I was missing. Peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was simply moving forward. The next few weeks passed, and I started to feel a shift inside of me. I wasn't the same person I was before the divorce. I wasn't the same person I was when I met Layla. I was something new, a version of myself that had been buried beneath years of hurt, self-doubt, and fear. But now I was learning to trust myself again, to believe in my own worth, my own strength. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. The days had started to feel different, lighter even. It wasn't that everything had miraculously fallen into place, but there was a shift. I could breathe again, really breathe, in a way I hadn't been able to for so long. The weight of the past had lost its grip on me, or at least I was learning how to carry it without it pulling me under. I'd always heard people say that time heals all wounds. I'd never quite believed it, but now I was beginning to understand. Time didn't necessarily heal everything, but it made room for new experiences, for growth, and for the possibility of something better. The divorce had been the hardest thing I'd ever gone through, and yet it had been the catalyst I didn't know I needed. It had pushed me into a space where I had to rebuild, to face the parts of myself I had ignored for years, the fear, the insecurity, the lack of self-worth that had kept me tethered to the past. All of it had been necessary in some twisted way. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to move forward. I was standing in front of the mirror one morning, looking at the reflection that had been so foreign to me a few months ago. There was something different about the person staring back. Maybe it was the strength in my eyes, the quiet confidence in my posture, or maybe it was just the fact that I finally recognized the person I had always been underneath the hurt, the person I had almost forgotten. The scars were still there, I knew that. They would always be there, but they were fading, turning into something I could learn from instead of something that defined me. I had started running regularly again, not just for the physical benefits, but for my mental clarity. Running had become my therapy, my way of shedding the weight of everything I'd been carrying. Each step was a reminder that I was moving, that I was no longer stuck in the past, trapped by the decisions I had made or the things that had been done to me. And with each mile, I found that I was rediscovering my purpose, my strength, and, most importantly, myself. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the loneliness crept in and I questioned if I was truly capable of moving on. There were days when I missed the warmth of a relationship, the companionship that I had once shared so freely. But those moments were fewer now. The more I worked on myself, the more I realized that the best company I could have was my own. I still missed the kids when they weren't with me, but their presence in my life gave me a sense of clarity. I wanted to be the best version of myself for them, to show them that despite the difficulties, we could all emerge stronger. It wasn't easy to move past the anger and sadness of the divorce, but I had to. I wanted them to see their father as someone who could rise above, who could move forward with resilience. And then there was Celia. I had started seeing her more regularly, though it wasn't anything serious. There was a connection, something warm that reminded me of the possibilities I had once thought were closed off. I didn't want to rush anything, didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. But with Celia, things felt different. She wasn't trying to fill a void in my life. She was just someone who made me feel seen again. We would run together, go for walks, share simple moments that didn't feel like they had any heavy expectations. I liked it that way. I didn't know where it would go, and I wasn't in a rush to figure it out. For once, I felt like I was allowed to take my time, to let things develop naturally. No pressure, no need to force anything. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to be someone else, to meet someone else's expectations. I was finally comfortable being me. Not perfect, not complete, but whole in a way I hadn't been in a long time. I thought about the future, about the kind of life I wanted to build now. It was no longer about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about following the path that had been set out for me by society, by expectations, by my past. It was about creating a life that was true to who I was and what I valued. Maybe I would travel more. Maybe I would take risks I'd been too afraid to take before. Maybe I'd spend more time doing the things I loved. Maybe, just maybe, I'd even allow myself to dream again. But for now, I was focused on today. I was focused on the person I was becoming. Someone who had been through hell and back but was still standing. Someone who had learned that the only thing I needed to do was to keep moving forward, and that was enough. What do you think of Gregor's journey of rebuilding his life after heartbreak? From which region are you watching this video? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. Don't forget to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.